In this video, we're going to look at the most common English grammar mistakes that people make, and this will improve your writing. We're going to focus on some of the more advanced elements of grammar that people tend to get wrong, but first we will look at some really basic stuff that you should be getting right, but people consistently are not. Firstly, very basic, the word a lot as one word does not and never has existed. If you do this, you lose all credibility. Your writing won't be taken seriously and you look like a complete idiot. So ensure that there's that space. Just never get that one wrong. Again, very simple. It means it is. That apostrophe is an I, so you get the is. So things like it's snowing, it's garbage, it is snowing. So every single time you see that word it's, you have to have this little alarm in your head that goes, is this that one or this one? And never get those wrong. Every time you write that word, set off that alarm in your brain and correct it. The word mines is basically always used to refer to explosives, but people use it as a possessive. This is incorrect. That's not how grammar works. You would never say that's mines. That means that is explosive, which is nonsense. Don't use it. An ellipsis is exactly three dots. Four is an ellipsis and a full stop that doesn't make any sense, and five is an ellipsis and two full stops, which is even more ridiculous. So exactly three. You see people having all sorts of weird random numbers of ellipses. Three. Next, very common, you should be saying Mary and I, not me and Mary. That's completely incorrect. Invite is a one people endlessly get wrong. They'll ask, did you get an invite to the party? Invite is a verb. What they mean to say is, did you get an invitation to the party, which is the noun. E.g., be careful with this one, two dots. You often see people just writing as egg without a G on it. It just looks ridiculous. Or E.G. There has to be that two dots. Be careful with that. Hopefully, more controversial among grammar experts, but generally keep everyone happy. Don't use it in this sense of this example, saying hopefully the sun will be shining tomorrow. And there's an ambiguity in that. Will the sun be shining hopefully? Or does the writer hope that the sun will be shining tomorrow? There's an ambiguity in the grammar there, so avoid using hopefully in that sense. Lastly, while refers to a period of time. It is endlessly misused. So people might write something like, while it was true he was gay. You think, was he gay between 1967 and 1984 and then was something else thereafter? While should only be used in contexts where it is applied to a period of time. The semicolon. Now, this is vastly underused. If people would use more semicolons, their writing would vastly increase. But of course, these semicolons have to be used correctly. And one of the correct uses is for listing, particularly where you have commas that are already being used. So in this sentence, you've got attending the dinner were Janice, comma, who works in accounts. Then you get the semicolon, Mary, who manages sales, and Fred, who was not invited. So you've got these comma things going on, but you're actually breaking up this list with the semicolons. So you're seeing Janice is one item in the list with a little bit of information. Then Mary's the next item and Fred's the next item. And these are separated with your semicolons. So that's one use. The other use is to break up related clauses. So you could say some people fly off the handle over nothing. That's one clause. And others are more rational and philosophical. And the division is made with the semicolon. An incorrect way to do this is with what's called a comma splice. So that's just doing the sentence, but with the comma in place there. And a comma splice is what you get when you're joining two independent clauses with a comma and no conjunction. That's the definition, and it is grammatically incorrect. That latter sentence is wrong, but the semicolon makes it right. Question people often ask, should punctuation appear inside or outside quotation marks? Bit fussy, but people get confused. So US convention is inside, British convention is outside. Judging by my accent, you can see why I'm using the British convention. But the exception is for speech, you put the punctuation inside. If someone's shouting, that's part of the quote. Or if someone's asking a question, that's part of the speech. So you include the grammar in amongst that. Using capital letters in titles, consistently done wrong by people. The title that I've put there is fantastically wrong. It's everything is backwards there. So correct should obviously be a capital. Of should not be a capital. So as a general rule, you don't capitalize a, and, the, and, in, and so on. I'll give you a basic non-exhaustive list there. There's more complicated rules, but generally you get the feeling from that. The only exception is if one of those is at the start. So, for example, you've got of mice and men, the of is capitalized, the and isn't. And you see in these ones, you've got in's not capitalized, on isn't. Same here with but, the, and a. So that's the correct way of doing it. Colons and incomplete sentences, common mistake you see. So it would be wrong to say people work for, and then just go bang, quick, list, colon, and then have your list money, something to do, and to satisfy social convention. This colon is just done out of desperation with this delusion that you need a colon before every list. Whereas with the complete sentence, it sounds much better. The research paper concluded that people work for three main reasons. There's kind of a natural break there. Work for three main reasons, and it's the expectation of a list. And then you get the colon introducing the list. So be careful with the colon being used without a complete sentence. Then you've got run-on sentences. You see these fairly often. It's where two complete sentences are inexplicably rammed into one sentence. So something like the choir was singing hallelujah. It was very uplifting song given the occasion. There's two sentences there. That's just awful. It sounds horrific when you get to that it. Various ways to fix it. Depends on the particular circumstances. So you could use a semicolon. You could look at dashes. In this one, I would tend to fix it with a conjunction. So you would put, and we found that it was a very uplifting song given the occasion. Then you've got making the clauses dependent. So you, instead of having two complete sentences, the first and second clause are dependent on each other. Or you can just create two sentences by sticking a full stop in the middle. Commas, fantastically important, and is a genius example from a blog called Authority Pub. And so compare this. My 5-year-old loves her teachers, Mary Poppins and Cinderella. You go, hang on. Is she taught by two Disney characters? Is Mary Poppins and Cinderella her teachers? That's a bit silly, but watch the magic. And the person that created this sentence is very clever. All right. My 5-year-old loves her teachers, Mary Poppins, comma, and Cinderella. So this is a list of three things. Her teachers is one thing she loves, Mary Poppins is another thing she loves, and Cinderella is a third thing that she loves. And this is what's known as the Oxford comma. Fairly hated by students of grammar, but it completely changes the meanings of sentences in certain instances. So be very careful with the commas. They can actually change the meaning of sentences. So let's look at using the comma properly. There's a rule that people say, which is never putting a comma before an and. And's conjunction, you don't need a comma. That's not a rule. It's never been a rule, and it's a stupid idea. And if you were to follow that rule, you would end up with people taught with Disney characters, as in the previous sentence. So disregard that rule. Technically speaking, most of the time it holds, but when it doesn't, it can be completely ridiculous. Here's another example. The poorly stocked bar only offered 3 drinks: wine, gin and tonic, and whiskey. There's a comma there because it's a list. And gin and tonic is one item in the list. And these are the non-exhaustive list of the times you use a comma. So you're looking at listing, the separation of clauses, after certain adverbs, so however, in fact, therefore, nevertheless, moreover, furthermore, and still should be followed with a comma. And then you've got parenthesis, which is where you've got the two commas for a parenthesis. Then you've got these things called dangling modifiers. And it's fairly simple to understand with an example. The definition's a bit kind of airy-fairy. So let's just look at an example. So you could say, when the guests arrived, the kettle was turned on. And you see that sentence feels okay, but when you really think about it, that's saying when the guests arrived, the kettle was turned on, as if the kettle was sexually attracted to your guests. So the grammar in that case is actually changing the meanings of the words and applying the words to things that it was never supposed to be applied to. But if we change it round without this dangling modifier, and we say, when the guests arrived, I turned the kettle on. The on is being applied to the kettle, as in that you've switched it on. So be very careful with the way that grammar affects the meaning of words. And lastly, and this is perhaps me being fairly fussy, but it annoys me, all right, is where you quantify absolutes. And the best way to understand what I mean by this is with an example. So you could say, hardly nobody wears their seatbelt. And well, that's a very strange phrase. And if you translate it by basically breaking it down, you're effectively saying a very small proportion of no one at all wears their seatbelt, a small proportion of nobody. There's an inherent contradiction. Sometimes it's not as ridiculous and as sloppy, almost no one is fairly sloppy and an awkward way of saying it. And occasionally it's just flat out contradictory and ridiculous. So be careful on that last one. So I hope that by the end of this video, you'll have a lot to think about. And when you start writing, you'll have these things in mind and start writing better and getting your meaning across better. And finally, thank you very much for watching.